Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I've run the Songwriters on Process website, where you can find more than 200 conversations with songwriters about the creative process. I'm not here to talk about tour stories, band drama, how a band got its name, or favorite foods. My goal is to treat songwriters as writers, plain and simple. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers. And today's interview is with Eric Pulido of Midlake. This is a new interview. We did this, I think, in the end of March 2022. This is Midlake's first album in 9 years. The new album is out on ATO Records. It came out March 18th, 2022. It is called For the Sake of Bethel Woods. Pulido spoke to me from his bar, or I should say the band's bar. From what I understand, they own a bar in Denton, Texas. So the bar was closed. There's not a lot of noise here. Don't worry. It was just the two of us talking. I really enjoyed this conversation. I love the new album. It is fantastic. But we touched on a couple of things here in the interview. The first one, we talked about the emotions, the dread, the anxiety, or whatever is associated with writing material and sharing it with your bandmates. What that is like to write what you think is great. And presenting that, warts and all, to bandmates for their thoughts, for their review. And it sounds like they have a great relationship, and that's not a difficult process, but what it's like to present your bandmates with those ideas. But it sounds like this is certainly a collaborative process, and they all fine tune the ideas that he brings. So we talked about that. The other thing that I found very interesting is running. We talked a lot about running. I'm a big runner as well, and so is Pulido. I've written about this in the Washington Post, that the impact that aerobic exercise has on creativity. It's been replicated. It's been studied in the lab. Briefly, not to bore you with the science lesson, but it's pretty simple. They have put people on treadmills for 20 to 30 minutes at about 60% max heart rate, which is not much more than a fast walk. And then after that exercise session, given those people a battery of tests to measure executive function and higher order thinking. And those people always score higher on those tests than people that didn't exercise. And so for about 90 minutes post-exercise, you're at your creative peak. Because of a chemical called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that gets secreted in the brain during increased blood flow, which of course happens during exercise. And that is why if you do exercise, running, hiking, biking, anything, and you find ideas are coming to you even either during exercise or afterwards, there's a reason for that. And a lot of songwriters tell me how they use aerobic exercise as a way to work through ideas, whether to work through ruts or to just come up with ideas on, and a lot of them unintentionally, they get song ideas as they're running or biking or whatever. And there's a reason for that. So we talked a lot about, he's a big runner. He has a 4-mile loop that he does around his house and uses running as a way, as part of his songwriting process. So we talked a lot about that, and I could talk about that forever, but that's something that a lot of songwriters bring up. So anyway, again, this is Eric Pulido of Midlake. Check out the new album, For the Sake of Bethel Woods, on ATO Records, and enjoy. Do you think it's important to create every day in some fashion? I mean, I find that some songwriters say you got to do it every day, even if it's shit, because eventually something good's going to happen. Others say don't push it, or else it becomes derivative and you want to really wait until the time is right. So where do you fall in that category?
I love creating things, but I don't look at it as a singular, like it has to be a song, it has to be a lyric or melody. I kind of just like, well, let's plant something today. Like I love to just create things, I as far as songwriting, I don't look at it as I definitely think it's something that maybe you get stronger at or more comfortable with, but I don't treat it as this, like, this sword that I'm sharpening, and I have to do it every day or I'm not going to be any good. I also lean on the guys a lot too, at least when we're doing Midlake. And that's a big help for me, because I don't feel like even if I'm writing a song, with the chord the chords, the melody, the lyrics, and any type of song structure, I still would lean on them to be like, hey, what do you think of this? And depending on what song, how they start and how they complete or vary. I'm pretty, much tasked with being the chief, lyricist and writing the melodies. But, the guys have come up with some great just songs or riffs and things that I can write over. And I've really enjoyed doing that as well. It's different thing, but I really love that.
When it comes to those lyrics and the melodies, are you doing them separate? Are they often together? Some people tell me, again, they kind of mix and match and go, oh, I got some over here and some over here. And, how does that work as far as the organic element of it?
Yeah, it usually is just it's kind of syllables and kind of gibberish. There might be, and I've got tons of, phone recordings that sometimes are just that, it's not even it's over chords, it's just something that, I get struck with and the technology helps you be able to pick up a phone and just sing it. Cause I'll forget it, and a lot of times it starts with that, even if there is like, a chordal idea that I'm trying to write something over, it's mostly gibberish. And maybe that synonym will lend itself to a word where I'm like, I'd like to sing this type of synonym or sound. And it would really be helpful if I caught onto a word and then kind of building around that. So it's not just words for the sake of words. Like there needs to be a purpose there in the lyric. I think even with that, at least with Midlake, I think with this album, we were much more transparent and specific about with topics and nature of some of the songs.
So I have a story. So I interviewed, this is probably 10 years ago, Jack Tempchin, who was a songwriter for the Eagles. He wrote Peaceful Easy Feeling and some of these other Eagles songs. And he said that when he and Glenn Frey would get together, they named that voice El Blurto, and that was the gibberish voice. And they said the same thing, but they gave a name to it.
Okay.
And El Blurto is what they gave it. And that I hear that a lot too, that kind of gibberish. You start with the gibberish, but where do you find those words? I'm curious. Are you, looking for those words, or are you just thinking what goes with this kind? How do those words come up?
Well, that part is a little bit more laborious in the sense that I have a little setup at my house, and I do have, a song like pad that I wouldn't say I exclusively use, but now I have a lot of stuff in it. So it's kind of become a special little blue notebook. And, I just start kind of chopping away, and it might start with a chorus. It might start with the verse or something. But I kind of, it depends. I mean, it's not always the same, but like I said, I want a song to have kind of like a purpose, a meaning behind it. What's kind of like the motivation here? And so it's good to kind of have that in my head and then kind of write with that in mind. And it's not always like this through written thing where it's like, okay, well, I've written that paper. It's very much like I'm coming back to it. And this isn't really get across what I want to say. It's words. And I could show the guys, this is kind of like, hey, this is kind of where I'm at, and I'm still, kind of chipping away. Because even though I don't think it's a matter of right and wrong, you want to feel like it's good, like it's arrived at a place where it's getting the point across and kind of touching all the good spots of how you would want a song to translate for yourself and then obviously someone else. And that's it can definitely be something where something irks you and bugs you. It's just like, I don't like how that sounds, and come back around to it, say, guys, I don't know if y'all were liking this way or that, but I did it in two other ways. And, so it is kind of like just a work in progress.
So you mentioned a notebook. I hear that songwriters are very possessive, particularly about those notebooks. So what's in that notebook? Are you a pen and paper person or are you a computer person when it comes to the lyrics?
No, it's always pen and paper.
It is.
And it's nice. I'm not necessarily trying to be, antiquated, my romantic in my vessel. I just, I just scribble things out so often and rewrite. It gets very like where you're trying to now I will say, even though I did have them on paper just in case when we did final recordings, there is something kind of special about kind of seeing that and you're trying to follow the lines that are now all jumbled and scribbled and no, go over here. And it points over to this thing and that. So there's something about the tactile nature of getting that down. And the notepad it's pretty small. It's one of those just spiral notebooks that's small, and I honestly think it was I did this songwriting trip, and I think they had just given it to me, and so it kind of started. This was when I was doing my solo stuff, so it has all that stuff in there as well, and then I carried on to the Midlake stuff after that. It was like, well, this notepad did me well. Might as well keep using it,
So is that for ideas, or is that just kind of because you mentioned also your phone? So you've got So what's the difference between the two?
So obviously the phone is kind of like that instinctual thing where it's like, oh God, I gotta capture this somehow, even though the idea might stink the next day. But it does really work as a just a great on the fly. I just want to get this down and make sure that I have it. I've used it in a lyrical way before, also, and I've even written. I like to run, and I'll sometimes get an idea. And obviously, all I have is my phone, and I might write something down there and then go back with my notepad because I probably won't finish the idea that way. So it's not singular, but it is a handy tool when just the moment happens. You're like, let's get this down.
So when do you go back? Because I hear the phone all the time, right? I mean, people mention the voice memos, the thousands of voice memos. Right. I interviewed Brian Fallon, and he told me, and I will quote him pretty much directly. He said, if any songwriter tells you they go back to those voice memos, they're lying. He goes, I have thousands of those. I've never gone back to them. Now, most songwriters have told me, no, that's wrong. They do. But at what point do you go back to them? Do you go back to them at the end of the day? Or is it kind of like, oh man, I need a line. I need a riff. I need something. Let me shuffle through those. At what point do you go back to those?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm on to something and it's not that formalized, then I definitely want to at least get some meat there to where I could go back to it and be like, I want to use that. And he's not wrong in the sense that there are ones that you go back to and they're not usable, but I generally, try to go back to ideas. It's just, and kind of leave them because you never know, or you forget about it, or you don't name them anything. It's just it kind of by default comes up wherever you are, and then maybe a timestamp. So I have gone back to them and tried to give it a name that helps me, remember what I was doing, or the song and drop D, or something like that. Right. But yeah, I've definitely gone back to them and used them and developed the idea a little bit more that way. But I have a setup at my house, and so that comes really, it's more handy because I can multi-track, whereas obviously with the iPhone, it's I could get out a guitar and sing, and I've done that as well. But it definitely helps kind of organize it. Things can get so jumbled and disorganized that, especially when actually trying to write for an album, you kind of you're just planning and scheming, how many songs have we gotten to double digits yet?
Right. That's the practical
number.
Right. So it sounds like you're not a very linear songwriter on the page. I think you mentioned the things, and I've heard songwriters tell me that some of them, yes, are linear. Others, there's thought bubbles and lines and arrows and stuff everywhere. So it sounds like if I looked at that notebook or that piece of paper or wherever it is, I'm just going to see stuff all over the place, right?
Yeah, with a lot of the songs, you would just because you're kind of seeing the ebb and flow of what is right or wrong, or what I feel is good or bad, and getting the point across. Because sometimes I'll start writing something and the gibberish kind of turns into words, but I still haven't quite figured out like what I'm ultimately trying to say. Not that it has to be this like, this, I don't know, just this monumental statement, but I think because you're so in a classic way of writing, you're so limited to what you even have the amount of time to say. You're trying to get some words in there, and obviously to team with the melody or harmony that kind of make that statement well.
So, do you revise a lot of your lyrics? Do you go back and do a lot of heavy editing, or do you feel like, that's kind of what was meant to be, and so I'll keep it there?
No, I do edit a lot. Yeah, I edit a lot. Some come easier than others, and I try not to be too precious about it. Like you said, like sometimes and I've always kind of felt like this, and we've sometimes to the detriment have kind of beaten up songs and maybe learned that law of diminishing returns. And so you try to just say, well, there was something about that song or that lyric, that melody that really struck a chord and felt good. Let's maybe lean into that, because now we're losing some objectivity here, and you're trying to like second guess yourself, and all you have is yourself or yourselves to kind of be the litmus test. So I'd like to think I have a healthy balance of editing, as the song goes.
How do you know though when that? I know exactly what you're saying, but how do you know when you step aside and you say, wait a minute, like this is not what this song started out as?
Yeah, that has happened a lot. And I think I know in the sense that I can still remember what it was, or even maybe have like a version of that. And so you can kind of like see the evolution, be like, you know what? Yeah, we did land in a better spot than we started. Or it could happen the other way. It was like, man, we lost something around month 3 of working on this song, trying to write this song. And a lot of that, I'm not trying to be secretive, but I do a lot of, especially the melody and the lyrics on my own. And it's kind of a big thing for me when I show the guys and kind of like, okay, what do you think? And I think they're generally, really encouraging and supportive, but they're not shy to, if something, maybe, just little things like maybe we could do this here. And I'm like, okay, maybe.
Well, when you share it with them, is that what's the like initial emotion? Is it dread? Is it excitement? Is it I can't wait to share it? Or is it because it's funny how as a songwriter, as a performer, like you perform in front of a lot of people, so and there's no qualms about that, about sitting, about bearing your soul to a group of people that you don't know, and yet when it comes time to your bandmates, it's like, oh man, do I want to share those with them, right? So what's that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's an excitement because, I'm sure there's an element, probably a narcissistic element of like feeling like, I think this is something good that I've created. Now let me validate that with the guys. And if they believe that, and we're a band that obviously, like you said, was going to go out and share this with the world, you kind of have a shared confidence of like, okay, let's throw it out there. And they're kind of going to tell us if that song needs to stay in the set or not,
Right.
So yeah, there's an excitement there for me when you kind of share that new idea, and it's usually not fully completed because there are songs that kind of song starts, for lack of a better term, that maybe just didn't quite take flight, for one reason or another. So it gives kind of some excitement of like to continue on that song, if it's just a verse and a chorus. A personal kind of story, if I may, with that. I wrote a song called Noble, about Mackenzie, our drummer's son, who was born with a rare brain disorder. And I remember Jesse playing the chords in the studio, and I had my phone with me, and I was moved to sing over this progression, "Oh, to be noble," and even kind of had a melody, but that was it. That was the only thing. And I saved on my phone. I said, "Yeah, could you please send me those chords?" And then I worked on the rest of the song at my house, finished it out with everything, including that melody at the end that just says, "Oh, to be noble," and shared it with Mackenzie first, because I was like, I was moved to write this song over those chords, but I'm totally cool if you don't feel like it's a Midlake idea or whatever. It was just something I was moved to write. And I was so glad that he wanted to include it and the guys wanted to include it. And it was one of those that just, it didn't take a lot of work. It was very natural. It just kind of flows out of you sometimes.
Do you have a lot of those discarded song ideas? Songwriters tell me, again, there's so many, from maybe years ago that they'll go back to. Do you have a lot of those?
I wouldn't say a lot, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely ideas that just, they didn't make the cut. And I've even, what's funny is they still kind of stay out there. One of those songs kind of made it back into the Midlake album that I just kind of had.
Because let's hear it. That's the stories I like. What was that?
So it's a song called "The End," and we stayed, even though I know Midlake has been away, we did stay friends and productive and do things, whether, like I said, like a collaboration project or a solo record that we kind of played on each other's albums, or we did even an effort for a kids album. So we were just doing things, and I found this idea, and I need to ask Jesse, because it was just Jesse and I at my house. We also have done some commercial type things, of just like writing to picture for maybe like a TV or commercial or something. And it had that progression, that same progression that you hear on the album, but a totally different gibberish melody that I had written. And because it's great to find these like nuggets, and I had the time, and that was what, the place that we were in, is like, we're writing an album. Everything, even though not everything worked, everything was fair game, right? Of just like, I've got this recording, I can take my vocal off of it and just have Jesse's keyboard part or piano part. And so I wrote exactly what you hear on the album. That first part before the band comes in is what it was. And it's just kind of funny how that happens sometimes, where, the band's like, well, I think just a vocal and piano sound good. It's like, yeah, but that was just what the demo was. Like, we can do more. It's like, well, sounds cool. So that was some bones that we dug up and had forgotten about. And like I said, I don't even remember what we were writing that idea for in the first place. It's just there.
Yeah. Is there a ritual? I have a ritual to my writing. I feel like there's certain times of day when I'm most effective, certain place. For me, that's a confidence factor, that if it's happened before then or at that time, it'll happen again. But how important is the ritual, or maybe, to your writing process, time of day, place, things like that?
Yeah. We for better or worse, we've always kind of worked on Midlake as like almost like a day job, even though that sounds like way too structured and like cubicle or something, but it's like, I mainly mean it just as the day. You wake up and it's like, okay, I'm going to get my coffee and I'm going to maybe go for a jog or whatever, but I'm going to work today, because, we quit our day jobs, not because we were, making tons of money. It was just by the sheer fact of like, we had to go tour and go do this thing full time. This was 2005 or 6. And then I think after we did it, it was like, I don't ever want to go back. So I want to work, you kind of hustle. And obviously we poured a lot of that into Midlake. So we were very committed into how we worked on it, whether that's writing, whether it's recording, and granted, now with some time and obviously families and some other, side gigs, things, you find a balance. But I think I've always kind of kept that same mentality. I'm not someone that stays up late at night and like, starts, I don't know, getting in my own world. And I like to just get up and get to work, and have the sunlight shining in, and my dog will sometimes come in and just lay right next to me, and I put the headphones on and start working on things, and maybe, taking breaks of trying to, of influence, or like I said, I love to go jog. And but my process is a daytime process, and kind of sitting, in front of, in my little home studio, and just getting to work.
Yeah. I think if you have a routine, it, like I said, part of it is confidence, right? I mean, but the discipline makes you more productive. I mean, and I'll tell you, I mean, I've interviewed songwriters have been around for, I've interviewed John Oates from Hall & Oates, and, for a long time. And those songwriters have been around the longest. They don't say, oh yeah, I write when I feel like it. They say you've got to do it every day, and they have that routine. And you mentioned sunlight, and I do hear that a lot too. People say they need light. There's something about light pouring in. And you mentioned that too. So I'm curious why you mentioned that. Is that an important element?
I mean, it's obviously, not to get too existential about it, but there is a human element that I'm definitely affected by, with the weather and then the sun, and it kind of telling me like, yeah, get up, get out, like, let it shine in or shine on you, and experience that. And it is, I guess it's helpful to me in that mindset, obviously, to create or to write. And I will say, even though I don't write daily, one thing that we've done, for better or worse, is we kind of don't shift gears that well. So when we're touring, we're touring, and when we're writing and recording, we're writing and recording. During that time, I am much more committed at a day-to-day basis. But now that we kind of shifted gears, I feel like there's a little pressure off. It's like, okay, we can focus on this, but I know it's coming right around the corner. Like, all right, so when's this next album coming? Because you can't take another 9 years. Like,
right,
so
that's true.
I'm hoping that we find that balance a little bit more, because we've talked about trying to write on the road, which is a whole new thing that I'm interested to, try to dive into.
Yeah, I don't hear that. Mostly hear from songwriters, they take that deliberate break. And the phrase I always hear is, filling the well kind of thing, that most of them don't write on the road because they want to use the road as a place to gather those experiences to write about when they're not on the road.
Right.
Yeah, that I'm very much of a morning person too. When it comes to writing, it's just that I just think it's important to have that routine to know, what works. But I want to talk about the running, because you mentioned that a couple of times. I'm a big runner too.
Oh, cool.
And I actually wrote about this in the Washington Post, an article in the health section a few years ago, because there's a very clear link between, you're going to love this, between aerobic exercise and creativity, that immediately after exercise, and they've measured this in labs where basically they've put people on a treadmill at 20 minutes at 60% max heart rate, which is really not more than like a moderate walk. Mm-hmm. And after the treadmill, 20 minutes, they'd give those people a battery of tests, and they always score higher on these cognitive tests than people who weren't exercising. There's a chemical called, brain-derived neurotrophic factor that gets secreted in the brain. And about 90, so this is not like snake oil. This is like legit science measured in the lab. That's about 90 minutes post-exercise, you get that benefit. So it's not, it doesn't last all day. But the good news is that, and they found that 30 minutes is about ideal. And the good news is that it's not dose responsive. So 60 minutes isn't twice as good as 30 minutes, and 90% max heart rate isn't better than 60%. But there's very, very, very clear evidence that aerobic exercise benefits has an immediate benefit on the creative process. So let's talk about that, because I've heard. So tell me how you use running as a part of your writing process.
So, it's funny because growing up, I hated running. I just loathed it. And obviously being in sports, I played baseball growing up. It's like it was required, and I was not a fast runner. And there's been little things in my life. I do this with bread as well. It's like, of course I love bread, but I've kind of tricked myself to like just pass on it, where it's almost like you kind of, I don't know. Yeah. You trick yourself like, oh yeah, don't want it, don't need it, or makes, maybe it doesn't make you feel great if you have too much of it. So running, I feel like I tricked myself, where now the thing that I hate, I almost like need it for my psyche. Like it is so freeing, because I just walk out the door and there's a park not far. It's about a 4-mile loop that I do. And I just, put on my headphones and put on a podcast. More so lately a podcast. I used to do music exclusively, but I kind of bounce back and forth. And I just go. And there's a couple of other guys in the band that are the same way. And I just know it because I know them well. It's like they need it. If they don't run, like you're going to just see it in their being. Like, I got to get out, I got to go.
Yeah.
And so it's a big thing when we're on tour. And it wasn't, I don't think it really was until the Midlake album that those types of experiences really, where they started to help with the writing, because obviously I'm out, I'm gone, I'm kind of in my own headspace. If I've got something on musically or even a podcast, obviously you can just go into another world of sorts, or I just turn them off altogether. And I've kind of got this melody that's been in my head, and I'm just using my run to kind of be the thing that's happening in the background where I don't have anything on, except I've just got this melody going through my head, and maybe even a turn of a lyric. And I'm like, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? While you're running, you're looking around, you see things, not necessarily trying to like, oh, I see a bird flying over, so now I'm going to write about a bird flying over, but just more of just kind of being, it's like making yourself available for something to just enter, and it just really has become a weekly ritual. I wouldn't say daily, because I try to balance it just between them. I know my knees are going to hate me probably here in about 10 years or less, but yeah, at least 3 or 4 times a week. And it serves as just a great, it serves as just kind of a great reset for me every day, a great way to start the day. And then, a possible song inspiration as well.
See, there's a couple other things that what they found also was that you need to be doing things while you run that don't require brain powers. They say running in an urban environment is not effective because you're practically going to have to worry about not getting hit by cars. Right. They say, and there's a study done at the University of Michigan where they found that woods and natural environments are more effective than urban environments. But I actually use running for me as a way to solve problems. Like I'll be like, you know what, like something's not, whether it's something I'm writing or an idea I have to get through. For me, it's like, oh, you know what, I'm going to go out on that run and it's going to happen then.
Right.
So do you get song ideas? Do you use that as a way, or is it more just kind of organic? Like, oh, you're running and all of a sudden a melody pops into your brain.
Probably more the latter. Not that there hasn't been like something that kind of, I want to use the run, like you said, as a problem solver. It's usually just kind of like it just happens. But yeah, I mean, especially, whatever's going on in my world, it's, I wouldn't say it's the only. I mean, obviously I have kids, I have a wife, I have, things that I have to do during the day. It's one of those things like that's just you, like you just kind of get to be alone. And I like being with people. I love being social and such, but I don't really like to run with people. I just kind of like to go on my own. Especially if you're trying to talk while you're like running. Like, this is a lot harder than being alone. So yeah, it definitely, there's kind of an excitement to it when that happens, and maybe it's within a run, maybe it's before a run, and you're like, I'm gonna get somewhere after this run. I'm not just gonna run. Like I'm gonna try to make some groundwork here on this. So yeah.
And do you do the same loop every time, or do you vary where you run?
So when I'm home, it's kind of become a boring kind of same loop, but it is a beautiful big kind of pond, lake, park, so but yes, I have to kind of get there. I just don't like to drive there. So I it's funny you mentioned that, because I don't think I've ever anything's happened on the way to that area, or once there, it's kind of like I feel like that's when kind of things open up. But on tour, I kind of also use it as and we all do, kind of compare notes, like, where'd you go? Where'd you run? Oh man, there's this amazing stretch down there, it's almost like competitive in a way.
Right.
But yeah, on tour, obviously it's a new place every day, which is really cool. And we'll see how that goes, especially if we're going to try to do any type of writing that maybe those runs can inspire something.
Well, I'd be curious if the monotony of the run you do all the time, that loop, if eventually it's going to kind of, if you'd be more creative going on runs to different places, because it's literally stimulating to your brain, because in those runs, on those loops where it's just the same thing over and over again, if running in a different city the different scenery might inspire you a different way.
Right. I'll report back after this year of touring. So.
It's fascinating stuff. I mean, I've heard things like people get song ideas because the cadence inspire the cadence of the run. Songwriters tell me that they've gone when they've gone on hikes or something like that they've noticed that the cadence of the footsteps really gives them a melody. How about other types of, and I've heard, driving, flying, being in like any kind of movement. I guess the other thing is, and this is, I think, more of a pandemic related thing. I've heard so many songwriters tell me that they've gotten songwriting ideas doing mundane chores around the house, vacuuming, cleaning, folding clothes, like something about doing something that requires no brain power. It kind of opens up the unconscious brain, to song ideas. Has that ever happened to you? Like, those mundane activities are stimulating at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think they kind of serve in the same way as running has, and obviously having your phone with you kind of can help you kind of capture it. I remember vividly being in Nantucket and going on a bike ride, and I recorded an song idea for my solo album as I was on that bike ride. And I stopped, lay it down, put my phone back in, kept bike riding, just looking around. I mean, it's beautiful there, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's funny too, because, and I save a lot of them just because it's almost kind of, maybe that's part of the narcissism, but I think it's good to kind of, I don't know. It's like, it's kind of just seeing the where something began, and just the most human kind of, like, even though I know it's on a phone, but just like, I'm just sitting there a little out of breath and kind of like trying to get this idea down. And then, oh yeah, that became this whole song, and it worked itself out. But it was just kind of this, I'll even mouth like the music, where I kind of have like, like what I could hear the piano or a guitar or whatever, or drum beat kind of doing, and then kind of go into singing an idea. So, yeah.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. Don't forget, you can find all of my interviews with over 200 songwriters on my Songwriters on Process website at songwritersonprocess.com, going all the way back to 2010. You can read them, watch them, or listen to them. So until next time, thanks for listening.